It's a beautifully clear Saturday afternoon. You've decided to tackle some simple weekend chores around the house.
Right, just a normal weekend.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe you are finally trimming that incredibly lush, broad-leafed houseplant sitting in the corner of your living room. Or perhaps later you're planning to sit out on your sunny back patio, casually squeezing some fresh limes to make a pitcher of margaritas.
That sounds idyllic, honestly.
It does,
Yeah.
right? Or maybe you're just going for a nice, quiet walk in the woods behind your neighborhood to clear your head. I mean, it is the absolute picture of domestic bliss. You are just going about your life, interacting with nature in the most mundane, everyday
The
ways.
kind of weekend everyone looks forward to. Yeah.
Exactly. But what you probably don't realize, what most of us never think about, is that in all three of those completely normal scenarios, you are unknowingly stumbling right into a hidden microscopic world of relentless botanical chemical warfare.
Yeah, you really are.
You think you're just gardening or mixing a drink, but biologically speaking, you are walking onto a battlefield.
It is quite literally a war zone out there. I mean, plants, despite being completely stationary, are some of the most ruthless combatants on the planet.
Right. And today we are going deep into how and why plants wage war on human skin. I was looking through this massive stack of material we gathered for this deep dive, and it is wild.
It really is.
I mean, I've been reading clinical dermatology texts that honestly read more like science fiction horror novels, and we're cross-referencing them with the CDC's official guidelines on poisonous plants, digging into some fascinating case studies from poison control, about common houseplants, and even reading up on agricultural reports detailing invasive species.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we aren't just talking about brushing up against the leaf and getting a mild, annoying itch, are we?
No, not at all. If we want to truly understand what's happening when we interact with these plants, we have to look far past those surface-level symptoms. The goal here is to understand the fascinating and sometimes terrifying biological mechanisms behind why plants do this.
Right, because there is a reason for it. Exactly. Think about it from the plant's perspective for a moment. They cannot run away from predators.
Right, they're rooted in the ground.
Now they can't hide. If an insect or a grazing animal or a human decides to take a bite or trample them, they are stuck. So over millions of years of evolution, they have had to develop some of the most sophisticated, devastating defense systems imaginable just to survive.
And before they evolved complex invisible chemicals, I mean, their first line of defense was basically just medieval weaponry, right? Like the blunt instruments, the structural armor.
That is the foundation of plant defense.
Yeah.
Yes. Mechanical trauma. We are talking about thorns, spines, and barbs. At its core, it is an evolutionary strategy designed to cause immediate physical structural damage to the tissue of whatever's trying to eat or touch the plant.
Which seems pretty straightforward on the surface,
Okay.
You touch a rose bush, you get poked by a thorn, it hurts you, pull your hand back, maybe you bleed a little, and you move on. The plant successfully communicated, do not touch me.
Right, but the initial physical injury is often just the opening salvo. Let's look at a very common plant, the prickly pear cactus.
Oh yeah, the ones with the flat pads.
Yeah, it's indigenous to the Americas. You see it growing wild all over the place. And a lot of people actually keep miniature versions of it as houseplants because, well, it's drought resistant and easy to care for. But the prickly pear deploys these structures called glochids.
Glow kids. It almost sounds like a microscopic alien parasite.
They behave a bit like parasites once they get into your skin, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
A glochid is essentially a tiny tuft of hair or a miniature spine. But unlike a sturdy rose thorn here, is the evolutionary trick glochids are held to the main body of the cactus incredibly loosely.
Oh, so they just fall right off.
The absolute slightest touch, just grazing the plant with your arm as you walk by, is enough to release hundreds of them. And if you put them under a microscope, you'd see that they are heavily barbed like a fishhook.
So they're designed to detach instantly and anchor themselves. You can't just brush them off your sleeve.
No, if you try to brush them off with your hand, you usually just end up transferring them to your palm, or worse, driving them deeper into the skin where the barb catches on your epidermal layers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and often the top of the glochid breaks off beneath the surface of the skin, leaving the barbed end permanently embedded.
That sounds incredibly annoying, but I mean, how dangerous is a microscopic piece of cactus fluff?
Well, it can lead to severe chronic medical issues because your immune system absolutely hates foreign objects. When that glochid breaks off, your body's defense mechanisms recognize it as an invader that needs to be destroyed.
Right, that makes sense.
But because it's a rigid plant-based structure, your immune cells, specifically macrophages, can't easily digest it. So they call in reinforcements and literally build a wall of inflammatory tissue around the glochid to wall it off from the rest of your body.
Wow, they just quarantine it.
Exactly. This forms what dermatologists call a granulomatous reaction.
So what does a granuloma actually feel like to the person who has it?
Clinically, it can mimic scabetic nodules. These present as hard, highly inflamed, deeply itchy bumps under the skin. And what makes this so insidious is the timeline of the immune response.
What do you mean?
These nodules don't pop up the afternoon you touch the cactus. The cellular process of building that granuloma is slow. It can take 4 to 8 weeks to fully develop.
Wait, really? 2 entire months later?
Yes, up to 2 months.
By that point, you've completely forgotten that you brushed against a decorative cactus in a dentist's waiting room back in March. You're just sitting there in May with these awful, painful bumps, totally confused.
Exactly. And in rare severe cases, the physics of the injury can be much worse. If the initial contact is forceful enough, or if the glochid happens to strike right over a joint site, it can actually penetrate through the tissue and enter the bone or the synovial joint spaces.
A microscopic cactus hair penetrating bone.
Yes. And when foreign organic material sits inside a joint space, the immune system goes into absolute overdrive. The localized inflammation within the joint capsule causes inflammatory arthritis.
Oh my gosh.
So you could be dealing with chronic, debilitating joint pain, undergoing scans and blood tests, all because a tiny piece of a houseplant broke off inside your knuckle months ago.
That is wild. I mean, it's brilliant from an evolutionary standpoint, but terrifying. But earlier in the notes, you highlighted that mechanical injury isn't just about the physical damage. These spines and thorns are also acting as delivery systems.
They act as vectors, yeah. So let's revisit that simple rosebush thorn we talked about. A puncture from a rose thorn can do significantly more damage than just making you bleed for a few seconds. It can inoculate your skin with a pathogen.
Okay, inoculate. You mean like a doctor giving a shot with a dirty needle?
That is a perfect analogy. The thorn is the dirty needle. This particular fungus thrives in decaying organic material like sphagnum moss soil and the surface of thorns. It's called Sporothrix schicki.
Sporothrix schicki. Okay.
Yeah, and when that rose thorn punctures your skin, it pushes through the protective epidermal barrier and deposits the fungal spores deep into your subcutaneous tissue. This results in a fungal infection known as sporotrichosis, sometimes called rose gardener's disease.
So what happens once the fungus is deposited under the skin? Does it just stay there and get infected?
At first, yes. A small firm bump develops at the site of the puncture, which eventually grows into an ulcerating nodule. It basically looks like a deep wound that refuses to heal.
That sounds awful.
It is. But the true danger of sporotrichosis is its mobility. Over the next 3 weeks, the fungus begins to reproduce and migrate up the lymphatic channels of your arm or leg.
The lymphatic system that's like the body's drainage network?
Correct. It's a network of vessels that carries immune cells and fluid. The fungus travels along this highway. So clinically, you don't just have one infected cut on your finger.
What happens?
You actually develop a visible linear track of red ulcerating nodules, marching progressively up your arm, following the exact path of your lymphatic system toward your lymph nodes.
It is literally tracking up your arm. Okay, so cacti and rose bushes, those are the obvious threats. If you look at them, they look spiky and dangerous. But our sources from the poison control centers focused heavily on plants that look completely harmless.
Right, the ones sitting on office desks or in living rooms all over the country.
Yeah, like the Dieffenbachia, commonly known as dumb cane, and the
Yeah.
philodendron. I mean, I have a philodendron. It's just broad, flat, waxy green leaves. There is not a single thorn in sight.
They don't need visible thorns because their weapons are microscopic and they are incredibly efficient. These plants belong to specific botanical families that have evolved to synthesize and store calcium oxalate crystals.
Okay, calcium oxalate.
But they don't just store these crystals haphazardly. They shape them into highly specialized defensive structures called raphides.
Raphides. Let's break that down. What does a raphide look like?
Well, if you were to take a piece of that philodendron leaf and put it under a high-powered electron microscope, you would see that these raphides look exactly like tightly packed bundles of tiny double-pointed glass needles.
Glass needles inside the leaf.
Exactly. And they are stored inside specialized plant cells called idioblasts. These idioblast cells are pressurized, almost like biological spring-loaded cannons.
So they're just waiting for a trigger.
Exactly. When the plant is handled roughly, or as is very common with toddlers or household pets, when someone bites into the leaf, The mechanical pressure breaks the idioblast cell.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the sudden change in turgor pressure causes the cell to explosively eject these bundles of microscopic glass needles directly into the soft mucosal tissues of the mouth, the tongue, or the
Oh,
skin.
wait. Let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. When a pet or a toddler accidentally chews on a philodendron, the plant isn't necessarily poisoning them with some toxic chemical venom. It is essentially chewing their mouth from the inside out using thousands of microscopic glass needles.
That is a very visceral way to picture it, but it's entirely accurate. It is a severe mechanical injury occurring on a microscopic scale. But the Dieffenbachia plant, the dumb cane, actually takes this physical attack a step further. Those calcium oxalate needles, they aren't just dry spikes. They are coated in highly reactive proteolytic enzymes.
Proteolytic, meaning they break down or digest proteins.
Right. So imagine the sequence of events. The needle forcefully punctures a cell in your mouth, creating a physical microwound. Simultaneously, the needle delivers this enzyme directly into the wound.
So it's injecting it.
Yes. The enzyme immediately begins digesting the cellular proteins around the puncture, which breaks down the cell walls and exacerbates the structural damage.
That sounds excruciating.
The clinical symptoms are immediate and violent. The patient experiences intense oral pain, a severe burning sensation, excessive drooling because they cannot close their mouth properly, and extreme swelling of the lips, tongue, and pharynx.
Wow, the swelling must be intense.
It can become so profound that it physically blocks the airway, causing respiratory distress and difficulty swallowing. It also causes a temporary inability to speak.
Ah, which is where the old common name comes from, right? Dumb cane. Because it literally strikes you dumb.
Exactly. And the data from the National Capital Poison Center really grounds this in reality. These aren't hypothetical scenarios. They happen every day.
Yeah, the case studies in that report were really striking. There was one specific incident involving an 18-month-old toddler. The child was just playing in the living room, grabbed a lower leaf of a Dieffenbachia, and started chewing on it.
Which is such a common thing for toddlers to do.
Right. And within seconds, the child started gagging, violently pawing at his mouth in extreme distress, and crying uncontrollably. Fortunately, the parents immediately called poison control. They were instructed to wipe out the child's mouth with a wet cloth, to physically remove as many needles as possible, and then feed him cold, creamy food like ice cream or yogurt.
Yeah, the cold helps vasoconstrict the blood vessels to reduce the swelling, and the thick, creamy texture helps coat the micro wounds and provide a physical barrier against the remaining crystals.
And thankfully, the toddler recovered. But it definitely isn't just kids making these mistakes. There was another case with a 55-year-old woman. She had a philodendron growing on a shelf right near her kitchen cutting board.
That's a dangerous spot for it.
Right. She was making a salad, mistook a fallen leaf from the houseplant for a piece of kale, chopped it up, and took a bite. The report noted she experienced immediate, intense burning and irritation in her mouth and throat.
It's a very easy mistake to make if you aren't paying close attention. And the danger isn't limited to ingestion. The sap itself, which carries these raphides, is a major hazard to the skin.
Right, there was the 66-year-old woman in the report. She wasn't eating the plant, she was just doing some light pruning. She snapped a stem off a Dieffenbachia to propagate it, and some of the clear sap got onto her hands. She felt a burning sensation, so she went to the sink, washed her hands with soap for about a minute, and then put on some soothing hand ointment.
Which intuitively seems like the correct response to a mild skin irritation.
Yeah, you'd think so.
But against raphides, it's completely ineffective.
Not even close to effective. The burning rapidly intensified. She ended up calling poison control in severe pain. And the cure they gave her wasn't a magic chemical neutralizer. They told her she had to stand at the sink and run her hands under a continuous stream of water, scrubbing with soap for a full 15 minutes.
Exactly.
She literally had to physically flush and drag thousands of microscopic glass needles out of her pores.
It perfectly illustrates how resilient mechanical defenses are. A quick splash of water does absolutely nothing against a barb that has physically anchored itself into your tissue. You have to mechanically extract it.
Okay, so we have covered the physical trauma. Giant spikes that can cause arthritis fungi traveling up your lymphatic system and microscopic glass needles coated in digestive enzymes. But the sources show that some plants just skip the physical needles entirely.
They do.
They don't try to poke you or trap you. They just go straight for pure, unadulterated chemical warfare.
Yes, we are crossing the line from mechanical defenses into true, direct chemical attacks. Medically, this results in a condition known as irritant contact dermatitis.
Now hold on, because I know when most people hear the word dermatitis, they instantly think of allergies. Like, oh, I got a rash because I'm allergic to that soap. But irritant contact dermatitis isn't an allergic reaction, is it?
It is not, and understanding that distinction is crucial to understanding how these plants operate. An allergic reaction is a hypersensitivity. It requires your immune system to have been previously exposed or sensitized to a substance.
Okay.
In an allergy, the plant's chemical isn't actually hurting you. Your own immune system is overreacting and causing the inflammation.
Okay, so what is irritant contact dermatitis then?
Irritant contact dermatitis is completely independent of your immune system's memory. The plant's chemicals directly chemically destroy your skin cells, specifically the keratinocytes that make up the outer layer of your skin immediately upon contact.
Just instant damage.
Yes. It does not matter if you have an allergy, and it doesn't matter if it's your first time touching it or your 100th. If this chemical touches living human tissue, it acts as a toxin and destroys it.
Let me try out an analogy here to make sure I have this straight. So what does this all mean? Irritant contact dermatitis is essentially like a burglar walking up to your house and just kicking the front door off its hinges.
That's a good way to put it.
It is direct, immediate structural damage coming from an outside force, whereas an allergic reaction is more like an inside job. It's like your own home security system panics, goes completely haywire, and accidentally burns the house down from the inside while trying to catch a fly.
I think that is an incredibly helpful way to visualize it. Yes, the plant kicks the door down. And a textbook example of this brute force approach comes from the Euphorbiaceae family, commonly known as the spurges.
Oh.
This is a massive family of plants that actually includes poinsettias pencil trees and crotons.
Poinsettias, the festive red plants everyone buys around Christmas.
Yes, though poinsettias are on the very mild end of the spectrum for this family. The more dangerous, purely ornamental members of the spurge family, like the pencil cactus, exude a thick, milky white sap the moment you break one of their stems.
Yeah.
And that sap is a chemical weapon.
What's in it?
It is heavily loaded with volatile compounds called phorbol esters and diterpenes.
And what exactly do phorbol esters do when they, quote-unquote, kick the door down on your skin?
They initiate a massive, rapid, and incredibly destructive cellular cascade. When the phorbol ester in the sap makes contact with the outer membrane of your skin cell, it physically damages it. This sudden structural damage activates a specific enzyme that lives inside your cells called phospholipase A2.
Okay, stick with me here. I am not a biochemist. What is phospholipase A2 and why is it so bad that it gets activated?
Think of phospholipase A2 as a pair of biological scissors that your cell usually keeps locked away.
Okay.
When the plant chemical damages the cell, these scissors are unleashed. They immediately go to the cell membrane and cut out a very specific fatty acid called arachidonic acid.
Arachidonic acid. Why does the cell membrane have acid in it?
It's a structural component, a phospholipid, that's normally perfectly safe while it's locked into the wall of the cell. But once phospholipase A2 cuts it loose, arachidonic acid becomes free-floating. And once it is free, other enzymes quickly convert it into highly inflammatory signaling molecules called prostaglandins and leukotrienes.
Prostaglandins, wait, that word is incredibly familiar. That's what ibuprofen targets, right?
That is exactly the connection. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, or NSAIDs like ibuprofen, work specifically by blocking the enzymes that create prostaglandins, which stops pain and swelling.
Oh, wow.
But in this scenario, the plant sap is forcefully hijacking your cells, forcing them to manufacture massive amounts of prostaglandins at an incredible rate.
So the plant is basically reverse engineering our pain receptors. What do the prostaglandins actually do to the skin in that moment?
They drastically alter the local blood vessels. They make the walls of your capillaries highly permeable or leaky. Blood plasma rapidly rushes out of the vessels and pools into the surrounding skin tissue, which causes massive rapid edema or swelling and leads to the formation of large, tense blisters.
So it's filling up with fluid.
Yes. And simultaneously, these chemicals act like a biological flare gun. They attract specialized immune cells called mast cells to the site of the injury. When the mast cells arise, they degranulate, meaning they dump massive amounts of histamine into the tissue, which triggers intense burning pain and severe itching.
And this entire complex agonizing cascade happens just because a single drop of milky white sap splashed onto your forearm while you were gardening.
It can begin within minutes to hours of contact. And the Euphorbiaceae family isn't the only one utilizing direct chemical attacks. Our sources highlight several others with different equally brutal mechanisms. Take the cowhage plant, for example. It utilizes a powerful proteolytic enzyme called mucinane.
Mucinane. Why do I feel like I've heard of that specific enzyme before?
Because it is notoriously effective at specifically targeting the itch receptors in the skin. It causes such an instantaneous, severe, and maddening itch that historically, the dried hairs of the cowhage plant, which contain the mucunane, were the active ingredient in commercial prank itching powder.
Oh, wow. So we literally commercialize botanical chemical warfare for practical jokes. That's wonderfully terrible. What else is on the list of chemical door
The
kickers?
Solanaceae family, which includes all of our chili peppers,
Oh, yeah. I've definitely chopped peppers and regretted it.
right, they synthesize a chemical defense called capsaicin. We happen to love it in hot sauce,
Mm.
but from the plant's perspective, it is a deterrent. If you get pure, highly concentrated capsaicin on your skin, it bypasses tissue damage and binds directly to the TRPV1 pain receptors in your nerves, tricking your brain into thinking the tissue is literally on fire, causing a severe chemical burn sensation.
Okay.
Then there are the isothiocyanates, which are the volatile burning sulfur compounds found in the mustard and radish families.
And the sources also pointed out that you don't even have to be touching a living green plant to suffer from this. Even woodworkers and dry shops aren't safe.
That is a fascinating subset of irritant contact dermatitis. Exotic hardwoods, like African blackwood cocobolo or certain rosewoods, maintain their chemical defenses long after the tree has been cut and dried.
Really? Even when it's just lumber?
Yes. When a woodworker runs these woods through a sander, it creates an incredibly fine dust. This dust is heavily loaded with irritating chemical compounds. It settles onto the woodworker's skin, mixes with their natural sweat, which rehydrates the chemicals and causes a chronic burning irritant dermatitis on their face, neck, and arms.
Now, there is a very important clinical clue you mentioned earlier about the timeline of this reaction. Because it's a direct chemical attack because the burglar kicked the door in rather than an ongoing allergy, the reaction follows a very specific trajectory. It is a decrescendo reaction.
Yes, and this is how dermatologists often tell the difference between a direct irritant and an allergy. With irritant dermatitis, the most severe damage happens almost precisely at the moment of contact, because that is when the chemical concentration on the skin is at its absolute highest.
It's a localized chemical burn.
Exactly. As your body's natural fluids dilute the chemical, and as the cells start repairing the broken door, the symptoms slowly decrescendo. They steadily improve over the next few days or weeks. The rash doesn't mysteriously spread to other parts of the body. It sees exactly where the chemical touched you, and it just slowly heals.
So to connect this back to you listening, if you have ever been in the kitchen aggressively chopping jalapenos for a salsa, and then you accidentally rubbed your eye or touched your face, or if you've been sanding exotic wood in your garage all afternoon and felt your forearms burning, you have experienced this exact biological alarm system firsthand. You have had the cellular door kicked in.
Absolutely. It is a highly effective brute force deterrent. But as you noted when we started, there is a third category of plant warfare detailed in our sources, one that is vastly more complex. It doesn't use blunt mechanical trauma. It doesn't use an immediate acidic chemical burn. Instead, it essentially deploys a highly sophisticated delayed trigger mechanism.
Right. It skips the physical needles, it skips the rapid blistering, and instead it basically uses a solar-powered laser. This is where things get truly sci-fi. Let's talk about the sun-activated saboteurs.
This is perhaps one of the most fascinating and, frankly, misunderstood chemical mechanisms in nature. Clinically, it results in a condition called phytophotodermatitis. If we break the Latin down, phyto meaning plant, photo meaning light, and dermatitis meaning skin inflammation.
So literally plant light skin fire.
That is a very succinct translation. Certain botanical families produce a unique class of chemical compounds known as furanocoumarins. Now, what's fascinating here is, to the plant itself, these chemicals are not designed to burn human skin. They are primarily an antifungal and antibacterial defense mechanism. They sit on the surface of the leaves and stems to keep pathogens and grazing insects away.
But when human skin comes into the equation...
If we look closely at the molecular behavior of these compounds, it's quite deceptive. If you get furanocoumarin-rich sap on your skin while you are standing inside a dark room or inside your house away from windows, absolutely nothing happens. You feel no pain, there's no redness, no stinging, no blister.
It is totally inert. It's just plant juice.
Right. But furanocoumarins are what chemists call photosensitizers. Their molecular structure acts like a microscopic antenna that is specifically tuned to absorb the energy from ultraviolet A, or UVA rays, originating from the sun.
Okay, so the sap is on your arm. You don't know it's there. You walk outside into the bright summer sunlight.
The UVA rays hit the furanocoumarin molecules resting on your epidermis. The molecule absorbs the UV photons, which excites its electrons into a higher energy state. It effectively turns the sap into a highly volatile, energized weapon. It undergoes a violent photochemical reaction right there on your skin.
And what does that sudden burst of localized chemical energy actually do to the human cells?
It penetrates the cell membrane, enters the nucleus, and literally binds to the DNA inside your skin cells. It physically inserts itself between the rungs of your DNA's double helix, a process called intercalation, and then covalently cross-links the DNA strands together.
Well, it cross-links the DNA, it fuses it.
Yes, because the DNA strands are locked together by this plant chemical, the cell can no longer read its own genetic code. It cannot replicate. Recognizing this catastrophic internal damage, the skin cells undergo apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. Furthermore, this reaction completely neutralizes the way your skin protects itself from UV light. Your skin is stripped of its natural sun defenses in that exact specific area.
So the plant silently disables your cellular shields, locks up your DNA, and then allows the sun to just absolutely cook you.
That is exactly the mechanism. The visible result is a severe, blistering, incredibly painful sunburn that doesn't appear immediately, but develops anywhere from 15 minutes to 48 hours after the sun exposure.
Wow, that's quite a delay.
Yes. And because the chemical reaction deeply damages and hyperstimulates the melanocytes, the cells that produce skin pigment, it almost always leaves behind severe hyperpigmentation. We are talking about dark brown, discolored streaks or splash marks on the skin that can persist for months or in some cases years.
It is a biological booby trap. The plant tags you with an invisible chemical tracker and the sun pulls the trigger.
I cannot think of a more accurate way to describe it.
And the truly wild part is that the sources list some incredibly common everyday culprits for this. We aren't talking about rare jungle vines. We're talking about things we eat all the time. Limes, lemons, celery, figs, wild dill parsnips.
Which is precisely why dermatologists and emergency room doctors see a massive spike in a very specific presentation during the summer months. It is colloquially known in the medical field as margarita dermatitis.
Margarita dermatitis. That sounds like a fake disease made up for a sitcom, but it is very real.
It's extremely common. Picture the scenario: someone is hosting a backyard barbecue. They are making drinks on a sunny patio, slicing and squeezing dozens of fresh limes. The lime juice, which is packed with furanocoumarins, drips down their hand or splashes up onto their forearm.
And they probably don't even think about it.
Right, they wipe it off casually with a towel, but the invisible chemical remains on the skin. They stay out in the sun for a few more hours, enjoying the party. 2 days later, they show up at an urgent care clinic with what looks like a splash pattern of second-degree burns across the back of their hand, utterly terrified and confused because they know for a fact they didn't spill boiling water or touch a hot grill.
That is so crazy. So if you are listening to this and you are planning on making margaritas outside by the pool, wash your hands and arms thoroughly with soap and water immediately after handling the citrus. Do not wait. But as bad as a lime burn sounds, our agricultural sources dedicated an entire section to one specific plant that takes furanocoumarins to an absolutely terrifying, almost apocalyptic extreme.
Yes, the giant hogweed, Heracleum mantegazianum.
Even the Latin name sounds like an imposing monster.
It truly is the monster of the plant world. It is a highly aggressive, invasive weed, originally native to the Caucasus Mountains in Eurasia, but due to ornamental planting in the 19th century, it has spread uncontrollably across Europe, the United States, and Canada. And when the botanists named it giant, they were not exaggerating. This weed routinely grows 15 to 20 feet tall.
20 feet tall. That is the height of a two-story house. That's a tree, not a weed.
It has a massive, incredibly thick, hollow green stem that is covered in dark, ominous purple blotches. The leaves are deeply incised, jagged, and can easily be 5 feet wide across.
It sounds like something from a prehistoric era.
It does. And the entire organism, the stems, the giant leaves, the roots, the sap is loaded with highly concentrated, incredibly potent furanocoumarins.
And it isn't just smooth, right? The agricultural reports noted that the stem is covered in these stiff, bristly hairs.
Yes, and much like the plants we discussed earlier, those hairs serve a dual purpose. They act like little hypodermic needles. If you are hiking through brush or weed whacking your property, those stiff hairs can actually penetrate thin clothing like cotton pants or a t-shirt to scratch the skin and deliver the furanocoumarin-rich sap directly onto your epidermis without you ever touching the actual surface of the stem.
And because of the sheer volume and concentration of the chemical, the burns from this thing are no joke.
They are horrific. Contact with giant hogweed sap, followed by even brief sun exposure, causes massive, severe second or even third-degree burns.
Third-degree burns from a plant.
Yes, we are talking about huge, painful, fluid-filled blisters that can cover entire limbs. The tissue damage is so profound that the subsequent sun sensitivity doesn't just go away in a week or a month. Patients who have been burned by giant hogweed have reported extreme painful sensitivity to sunlight on the affected areas for up to 6 years after the initial exposure.
6 years of wearing long sleeves in the summer because you brushed against a weed in the woods.
And the dermatological burns aren't the worst-case scenario. The sap somehow gets into your eyes, for example, if you get it on your hands, and then wipe sweat from your brow while working outside the purinocumarines, react with the light entering your eye. This causes severe scarring of the cornea, leading to temporary or very often permanent blindness.
So what are you actually supposed to do if you are walking your dog and you see a 20-foot-tall, purple-blotched weed with massive white umbrella flowers growing in a ditch?
You back away immediately. The state conservation guidelines across the country are incredibly clear and uniform on this. Do not, under any circumstances, try to remove it or cut it down yourself. You're supposed to take a picture from a safe distance, note the location, and call a specific state environmental hotline.
And what do they do?
They dispatch trained agricultural professionals wearing full, impermeable hazmat-style suits and face shields to chemically eradicate the plant.
They literally send out hazmat teams for a plant. And the problem is it's spreading, isn't it?
Extremely rapidly. Its reproductive cycle is staggering. A single giant hogweed plant produces a massive flower head that can drop up to 50,000 winged seeds. These seeds are incredibly hardy. They can float down rivers and streams to colonize new riverbanks, and they are light enough to blow across the crust of the snow in the winter to reach new fields. It is a highly invasive, ecologically destructive, and incredibly dangerous organism.
Okay, so giant hogweed is basically the final boss of the plant kingdom. It is massive, it causes third-degree burns, it requires a government hazmat team to destroy. But here is the critical vulnerability in its design. It requires the sun to cause harm. If you touch it in the pitch black of night and wash it off before dawn, you are theoretically completely okay.
Scientifically speaking, yes. Without the UVA trigger, the chemical remains dormant.
But as we dive into the next major piece of our research, we have to talk about an evolutionary step past the purinocumarins. We have to talk about a botanical weapon that doesn't need the sun. It doesn't need giant spikes. It doesn't need to be 20 feet tall. It is an invisible, odorless oil lurking in the woods of almost every neighborhood, and it is actively coming for 90% of the human population. Let's talk about the ultimate allergen, poison ivy and urushiol.
Clinically referred to as toxicodendron dermatitis. This is without a doubt the single most common plant-induced skin condition in North America. The epidemiological data is staggering. Up to 50 million Americans suffer from this condition annually.
50 million people every single year. That is a massive portion of the population.
It is, and it's driven by 2 factors. The chemical compound itself, urushiol, is incredibly potent, and human biology is uniquely susceptible to it. Between 85 and 90% of all people will eventually develop a severe sensitivity to it after exposure.
And urushiol isn't just found in poison ivy, right? It's a shared weapon.
Correct. It is the exact same active allergenic oil found in eastern poison ivy, western poison ivy, poison oak, and poison sumac. They all fall under the toxicodendron genus.
Just a quick visual or refresher for everyone listening, because I feel like we all need to hear this every summer. Eastern poison ivy is the classic one. It often grows as a rope-like, hairy climbing vine up the sides of trees, and it has 3 distinct leaves. Western poison ivy is typically more of a low-growing shrub on the ground. Poison oak also features 3 leaves, but they are lobed and rounded, mimicking the shape of true oak leaves, and the plant often produces clusters of pale greenish-white berries. And poison sumac breaks the rule. It has 7 to 13 leaves arranged in pairs along a reddish stem, and it exclusively grows in very wet, swampy, boggy areas. Leaves of 3, let it be.
It is a very good rule of thumb that will save you a lot of grief, even though sumac is the exception. But regardless of whether it's a vine, a shrub, or a swamp tree, the weapon they deploy is identical urushiol. It is a clear, sometimes slightly yellowish, completely odorless, non-volatile oleoresin that is synthesized and stored in the plant's internal resin canals.
Let's clarify non-volatile because we used that word earlier. That means it doesn't evaporate into the air like a perfume.
Exactly. It doesn't off-gas. It stays exactly where it is placed, as a heavy, sticky oil. And when we talk about its potency, it is difficult to overstate how little of this substance is required to cause a systemic immune panic. Studies have shown that just 1/1000th of a gram of urushiol is enough to trigger a severe clinical reaction in a highly sensitive person.
1/1000th of a gram. You couldn't even see a speck that small with the naked eye. It's entirely invisible.
Completely invisible. And unlike the direct chemical irritants we discussed earlier, like the spurge sap that acts like a burglar, kicking the door down and causing immediate blistering, urushiol is incredibly stealthy. It does not damage the skin on contact. Instead, it initiates a complex immunological process called a type 5 delayed hypersensitivity reaction.
Okay, this is where the biology gets fascinating. Walk us through this timeline. How does an invisible, painless drop of oil turn into a weeping, incredibly itchy, agonizing rash 2 days later?
It is a profound multi-step cellular cascade. When urushiol rubs onto your skin, its chemical structure, specifically its long allopatic side chain, makes it highly lipid soluble.
Okay, what does lipid soluble mean in this context?
This means it easily and quietly slips right past the tough, protective outer layers of dead skin cells, sinking deep down into the living dermal tissue.
So it's literally sneaking past the guards at the gate without sounding the alarm.
Precisely. The guards don't even see it. Once inside the living tissue, the urushiol molecule is metabolized by enzymes in the skin and oxidized into a highly reactive intermediate molecule called a quinone. This quinone then covalently binds to your own natural skin proteins.
Let's pause on covalently bind. Does that mean it just sticks to them like a stain?
Much worse than a stain. A covalent bond is a permanent sharing of electrons. The plant chemical permanently fuses with your human proteins to create a brand new hybrid molecular complex. At this point, your immune system's specialized scouts cells, called Langerhans cells, are constantly patrolling the dermal layers. They inspect the local proteins. Suddenly, they encounter this new urushiol protein hybrid. It doesn't look human anymore.
The plant effectively disguised our own cells to look like alien invaders.
Yes. The Langerhans cells recognize this hybrid complex as a severe foreign threat. They physically engulf the complex, pull up their biological anchors, and migrate out of the skin, traveling through the lymphatic system until they reach your local lymph nodes. Once there, they present this alien protein to the generals of your immune system, the T lymphocytes, specifically the CD8 effector T cells.
The generals get the intel from the scouts.
Right. The T cells recognize the antigen, undergo rapid clonal expansion to build an army and sound a massive alarm. They release highly inflammatory chemical signals called cytokines. These cytokines rush back to the site of the skin exposure and call in the heavy artillery, the macrophages. These are massive, destructive white blood cells designed to eat, dissolve, and destroy foreign invaders.
So the heavy artillery rushes into the skin where the oil first landed.
And they begin systematically destroying everything that has the urushiol bound to it. But here is the biological tragedy of poison ivy, because the urushiol is permanently covalently bound to your own skin cells. The macrophages end up destroying your normal healthy tissue in the process of trying to clear the oil. It is massive, devastating, friendly fire.
The immune system is basically carpet bombing its own territory to get rid of the plant oil.
That is exactly why the skin blisters so severely, why it oozes clear fluid, and why it becomes so incredibly red, inflamed, and itchy. Your own immune system is tearing the tissue apart. And because this entire intricate process, the penetration, the protein, binding, the scouting, the travel to the lymph nodes, the T-cell activation, the arrival of the macrophages takes significant time. It is classified as a delayed reaction. You usually don't see the rash until 24 to 48 hours after the initial exposure.
Or even longer, right? I read that if it's your first time touching it, the delay is wild.
If it is your very first time being exposed, your body doesn't have an existing army of memory T cells. It has to build the army from scratch. In those cases, it can take up to 14 days for the rash to suddenly appear.
Which makes tracing it back to the source so incredibly frustrating. You went hiking 2 entire weeks ago, you forgot all about it, and suddenly you are covered in an agonizing rash. And unlike the irritant chemicals from earlier that decrescendo and heal this reaction is a crescendo, it builds and builds and gets worse as more and more T cells arrive to join the fight.
It creates a feedback loop of inflammation that can last for weeks.
I want to highlight something from our sources that makes this even more daunting. The persistence of urushiol in the environment. We noted earlier that it's non-volatile, but exactly how stable is this oil?
It is terrifyingly resilient. Because it doesn't evaporate and doesn't break down easily in air, it persists. If you are a clearing brush in the fall and you get urushiol on your thick leather gardening gloves, your heavy boots, or even if your dog runs through a patch and gets it on their fur, if you take those gloves off and toss them on a shelf in the ambient temperature of your garage, the urushiol can remain active, potent, and fully capable of causing a severe rash for up to 5 years.
5 years. You could put on a winter jacket from 3 years ago, go to the grocery store, and break out in poison ivy.
If the garment hasn't been properly washed with heavy detergents, absolutely.
Oh.
And its stability isn't just about time, it's about temperature. Urushiol is incredibly heat stable. If you are clearing land and you decide to burn dead brush that contains dried poison ivy vines, the urushiol does not cleanly incinerate.
What does it do?
It physically splatters. At around 600 degrees Fahrenheit, the oil vaporizes and attaches itself to the rising smoke particles.
Yeah.
It becomes an aerosolized weapon.
So you are breathing it in?
Yes. And if a sensitive individual inhales that urushiol-laden smoke, the oil enters their respiratory tract. They develop that exact same destructive type 4V hypersensitivity reactions, friendly fire from the macrophages, but it happens inside the delicate mucosal lining of their lungs. It causes severe internal inflammation, profound respiratory distress, and in extreme cases, pulmonary edema that can be fatal. The golden rule of forestry is never, ever burn poison ivy.
Okay, let's take a second to do some major myth busting here.
Yeah.
Because I have heard a specific piece of common knowledge about poison ivy my entire life, and the medical texts completely contradict it. The myth is, if I get the rash and I have these big weeping blisters and I scratch them, the clear liquid that oozes out of the blister will spread the poison ivy to other parts of my body.
That is undeniably the most common myth regarding toxicodendron dermatitis, and it is 100% unequivocally false.
Really, there's no poison in the blister.
None. The clear fluid inside the blister is just your body's own serum. It is blood plasma without the red blood cells that has leaked out of your highly permeable inflamed capillaries into the surrounding tissue as part of the immune response. There is absolutely no urushiol in the blister fluid. You cannot spread the rash to your neck by scratching a blister on your arm.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let me push back on this because I have had poison ivy and it definitely feels like it spreads over the course of a week. First, my ankle breaks out on Tuesday. Then on Thursday, suddenly my knee breaks out. Then by Saturday, there's a patch on my forearm. If I am not spreading it by scratching the blisters, why is it constantly appearing in new places at different times?
It's an optical illusion of timing, and it all comes down to the thickness of your skin and the absorption rate of the oil. Imagine your hike on Sunday. You brushed against the plant, and the urushiol oil was deposited onto your ankle, your knee, and your forearm all at the exact same moment.
Okay, the exposure happens simultaneously.
Yes. But human skin is not uniform. The skin on your ankle is relatively thin, so the oil penetrated quickly, covalently bound to the proteins quickly, and the immune system found it and reacted in 24 hours. The skin on your knee, especially over the joint, is thicker and tougher, so it took the oil 48 hours to breach the barrier and trigger the T cells. The skin on your forearm was thicker, still taking a full 72 hours for the cascade to initiate.
Oh, that explains it.
Right. The rash isn't actively spreading it. It's simply appearing on a delayed, staggered schedule based purely on how long it took the oil to penetrate the varying thicknesses of your local epidermis.
That makes an incredible amount of sense. It's like having multiple delayed fuse bombs planted on you, and they are all just set to go off at different times depending on how deep they were buried.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it. The only possible way you can actually spread the rash to a new area is if the original unabsorbed free-floating oil is still physically sitting on your fingernails, your hands, or your unwashed clothes, and you physically transfer that active oil to a new patch of skin.
Which brings us to the critical protocol for exposure. If you are hiking and you know you just walked bare-legged through a patch of three-leafed vines, the clock is immediately ticking. You have a window of about 1 to 4 hours to get that invisible oil off your body before it covalently binds to your proteins and the process becomes unstoppable.
Right, and you cannot just casually rinse it off. Because it is a heavy lipid-soluble oleoresin, you have to treat it like you are trying to wash thick, heavy machine grease off your hands. The CDC recommends using rubbing alcohol first if you have it, to act as a solvent to break down the chemical structure of the oil. Follow that immediately with copious amounts of water.
Cold water, right. The texts were very specific, not hot.
Never use hot water. Hot water causes vasodilation. It opens your pores, which just provides the urushiol with a wider avenue to penetrate deeper and faster into your skin. You must use cold water to keep the pores tight. Then wash aggressively with a heavy degreasing dish soap or a specialized commercial poison ivy scrub that contains friction agents like pumice to physically lift the oil away. And you must strip off your clothes and wash them along with your boots and tools in hot water and heavy detergent.
And just to add a layer of modern anxiety to this, there is a climate change angle in the agricultural data, isn't there? The future of toxicodendron looks rather grim.
It does. Extensive botanical studies over the last decade have shown that as atmospheric carbon dioxide levels rise globally, poison ivy plants are essentially being ecologically supercharged.
Oh, great. Just what we needed.
Because plants breathe CO2, the increased concentration acts like an unlimited food supply. The vines are growing significantly faster, the leaves are developing a larger surface area, and most concerningly, the plant's internal chemistry is shifting. They are synthesizing and producing significantly more of a specific molecular variant called saturated urushiol.
Is saturated urushiol biologically worse for us?
Considerably worse. Saturated urushiol is the most highly allergenic form of the compound. It binds more effectively and triggers a much more violent, aggressive immune response from the T cells. So in a warmer, higher CO2 world, poison ivy isn't just spreading its geographical footprint. The individual plants are becoming structurally larger, more aggressive, and significantly more toxic to humans.
So, trying to constantly outrun or scrub off an invisible 5-year stable oil that is literally getting stronger and more toxic every single year is exhausting. And if you are someone who works outside, if you are a wildland firefighter cutting fire lines through the brush, or a landscaper, or a farmer's, like, you can't just avoid the woods, you have to be in it. Wouldn't it be vastly superior if we could somehow just train our bodies to ignore the oil entirely?
Achieving systemic immune tolerance to urushiol is considered the holy grail of dermatological immunology right now.
Which brings us to the final major section of our research, the quest for immunity. Now, I have read historical accounts of Native American tribes and early European pioneers intentionally eating small, newly sprouted poison ivy leaves in the spring with the belief that it would make them immune to the rash for the rest of the summer. I always assumed that was just dangerous folklore. Is there actual peer-reviewed science to back that concept up?
It sounds like pure dangerous myth, but there is actually a robust, albeit historically obscure body of medical literature investigating exactly this mechanism. It is clinically referred to as oral desensitization. We look closely at a very comprehensive, modern systematic review published out of Kansas City University. The researchers meticulously analyzed 6 distinct controlled clinical trials that involved a total of 410 human participants over several decades.
So modern doctors actually gave people poison ivy to eat.
Essentially, yes,
Yeah.
though in a highly controlled, purified manner. They certainly didn't send them into the woods to chew on leaves. They administered precise, incredibly small, and carefully escalating oral doses of highly purified urushiol. In some of the later trials, they used active synthetic derivatives of the oil called PDC and HDC. These compounds were suspended in gelatin capsules filled with either corn oil or olive oil, and the patients swallowed them daily.
So they literally built a poison ivy pill. And the goal was to induce immune tolerance. But conceptually, how does eating a chemical make your skin stop reacting to it? Why doesn't it just cause a rash in your stomach?
If we connect this to the bigger picture to understand this, we have to look at the dual nature of the human immune system. It works very similarly to the modern cutting-edge exposure therapies currently used to treat severe food allergies like peanut allergies. The immune system in your skin, which we discussed, is primed to attack. But the immune system lining your gastrointestinal tract, your mucosal immunity, operates under a completely different set of biological rules.
How so?
The gut is evolutionarily designed to tolerate massive amounts of foreign biological substances. If it attacked everything foreign, we would be violently allergic to every piece of food we ever ate. The gut is heavily populated by specialized tissues like Pear's patches that constantly sample passing antigens and actively instruct the body not to attack them.
So you are trying to introduce the urushiol to the peaceful part of the immune system rather than the aggressive part.
Precisely. Exposing the gut mucosa to the urushiol antigen over a long period suppresses the typical allergic responses. Crucially, in the case of poison ivy, this slow oral exposure induces the creation of regulatory T cells, often called Tregs.
Tregs, the peacekeepers of the immune system.
That is their exact role. These newly minted Tregs circulate through your bloodstream, and when they encounter urushiol in your skin, they actively suppress the release of the pro-inflammatory cytokines, specifically interferon gamma and interleukin-17, that the CD8 effector T cells are trying to release. The Tregs essentially stand between the generals and the artillery. As they stand down, we recognize this substance and it is not a threat.
Okay, the biological theory is brilliant. Use the gut to reprogram the skin. But looking at the Kansas City University data, did the pills actually work?
The clinical results were officially characterized in the literature as a modest success. The meta-analysis aggregated the data and showed a statistically significant increase in hyposensitization compared to the control groups who received placebos. The relative risk was calculated at 1.38.
Meaning what in practical terms?
It means the patients in the treatment group were roughly 38% more likely to achieve a noticeable reduction in their skin sensitivity to urushiol compared to those taking the placebo.
I have to say, modest success combined with a 38% improvement sounds like there is a rather large but coming.
There was a very, very large but. To achieve that modest level of success, The patients had to endure a rigorous months-long induction period of taking these capsules every single day.
Hmm.
And the systemic side effects they experienced during that time were well notable.
I can only imagine. What kind of side effects do you get from swallowing a poison ivy pill every day?
Well, many patients experienced generalized flushing of the skin. A significant number developed generalized maculopapular rashes, which are broad areas of red raised bumps on parts of their body that had absolutely no physical contact with the plant. But the most predominant side effect, the one that caused a highly significant number of participants to completely drop out of the clinical trials, was a condition the medical literature delicately refers to as pruritus ani.
Pruritus ani. I am translating the Latin in my head. Pruritus means severe itching. Ani means exactly what I think it means.
Severe intractable itching of the anus.
Oh no, oh, that is terrible.
Yes. The clinical data is stark. In one specific trial detailed in the systematic review, an astonishing 16 out of the 21 patients developed this highly specific, agonizing side effect while taking the urushiol capsules.
So let me get the biology of this straight. You swallow the purified oil in a capsule, it travels through your stomach, it goes through your entire digestive tract, and when it finally exits the body, it causes an allergic contact dermatitis reaction on the way out.
Based on the clinical presentation that appears to be exactly what happens mechanically. Not all of the urushiol is fully absorbed by the gut mucosa. The unabsorbed active oil continues through the GI tract, and as it is excreted, it interacts directly with the highly sensitive mucosal tissue at the very end of the digestive tract, triggering an intense, localized type IV inflammatory response right there.
I mean, I have to laugh because it sounds like a bad joke, but I also ask this very seriously. Is oral desensitization actually a viable path forward for medicine? Or are we basically concluding that the medical trade-off for not getting poison ivy on your shins during a summer hike is dealing with a perpetually itchy backside for 6 months out of the year?
It is a profound and completely valid clinical hurdle. The dropout rate across these studies was over 12%, largely due to patients simply refusing to endure that specific unbearable side effect. And it's worth taking a moment to note the extreme lengths medical researchers went to back in the 20th century to try and solve this problem. The review highlighted that some historical studies from the 1970s, specifically those conducted by a prominent dermatologist named Dr. Epstein, actually utilized incarcerated volunteers in prisons to test the upper limits of these oral urushiol doses.
Wow, testing on incarcerated populations, that is a vastly different ethical era of medicine.
It was an entirely different landscape for clinical ethics.
Mm.
To their credit, the authors of the recent systematic review explicitly factored that history into their methodology. They conducted a sensitivity analysis to ensure that including data from those historical incarcerated populations didn't skew the modern findings and that it was still scientifically appropriate to include. But it really highlights the sheer desperation within the dermatological community to find a systemic cure for this allergen.
Because the reality is for someone who just gardens on a Sunday afternoon wearing long pants and maybe putting on a barrier cream is totally fine. But for a wildland firefighter jumping out of a helicopter into a blazing brush fire full of aerosolized urushiol smoke, a barrier cream on their arms isn't going to save their lungs. They need internal systemic protection.
It's exactly. For those high-risk outdoor professions, a functional daily pill or a viable vaccine would be completely life-changing. It would save them from weeks of lost wages, reliance on heavy systemic steroids, and severe medical distress. And despite the historical setbacks, the sources mention that scientific interest is strongly reemerging. There is currently a brand new, highly engineered synthetic urushiol derivative known as PDC-ABC that is undergoing phase 1 clinical trials right now. The goal is to see if they can finally unlock the gut tolerance without triggering the exit side effects.
Let's hope the pharmaceutical engineers figure out a better slow-release coating for that pill. Until then, you mentioned barrier creams. What is the current gold standard if you know you have to go into the woods?
For now, the most effective medical defense, aside from heavy clothing, is a specialized barrier cream containing an active ingredient called bentaquatum. You apply it liberally to your skin before you go outside, and it dries to form a microscopic physical clay-like shield on your epidermis. It creates a barrier that the urushiol oil physically cannot penetrate. But again, it is preventative armor. You have to know you are walking into the war zone before you get there.
Which brings us full circle on this incredible itchy journey. We started by exploring the microscopic pressurized glass needles waiting inside the beautiful Dieffenbachia sitting completely unnoticed in our living rooms. We analyzed the brute force chemical burglars like the spurge sap that literally cleave the arachidonic acid in our cells to cause instant blistering pain. We uncovered the terrifying sun-activated furanocoumarin bombs of the giant hogweed that quietly rewrite our skin's DNA. And finally, we explored the stealthy, delayed T-cell warfare of poison ivy and the slightly comical but deeply painful lengths modern science has gone to in an attempt to hack our own gut immunity against it.
It truly is a remarkable testament to the silent, ongoing evolutionary arms race between stationary plants and the herbivores that interact with them. But before we officially wrap up the deep dive, the data we've discussed today raises a very important overarching question. It is a thought I want to leave you and the listeners with, something to mull over that wasn't the explicit focus of these clinical studies, but is heavily implied by the very epidemiology we discussed.
I love a good lingering question. Let's hear it.
We noted earlier that up to 90% of the population is sensitive to urushiol, but conversely, that means 10 to 15% of the human population is completely naturally immune to it. These individuals simply cannot be sensitized. It doesn't matter how much raw urushiol oil you put on their skin or how concentrated the dose is. Their Langerhans cells and T cells just fundamentally do not care about the urushiol protein complex. They do not react.
They just won the immunological genetic lottery.
Exactly. Now consider where modern medicine is heading. As we move deeper into an era of advanced gene therapies utilizing tools like CRISPR, we are rapidly learning how to edit the human genome with incredible precision. What if the ultimate key to stopping allergic contact dermatitis entirely isn't found by grinding up the plant's oil to make a highly flawed pill that causes severe gastrointestinal distress?
You're thinking we need to stop looking at the plants and start looking at the humans.
Yes. What if the future of dermatology is comprehensively mapping the genetic code of those lucky 15% of naturally immune individuals? If geneticists can isolate the exact gene sequence that instructs their Langerhans cells to peacefully ignore the urushiol, we might eventually be able to use CRISPR or mRNA technology to reprogram the T cells of the rest of the 85% of the population. We wouldn't be fighting the plant with barrier creams or toxic pills anymore. We would be fundamentally upgrading the human immune system to simply render the plant's ultimate weapon completely obsolete.
A literal genetic software update to turn off poison ivy forever. That is a brilliant, profoundly provocative thought to end on. If you are listening to this right now, I sincerely hope we haven't made you entirely agoraphobic or terrified of your own garden. But I do hope that the next time you look at your backyard or water your houseplants or slice a lime for your next margarita, you do it with a newfound respect for the complex biology at play. It is a quiet, microscopic war out there, but now you know their exact tactics. Maybe just go ahead and buy a thick pair of canvas gloves just in case.
And remember, if you do make a mistake, wash with cold water.
Always cold water. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe out there.